I mean, we can't be more back, right? I mean, it almost was like a season premiere of sorts when it's like when you tune out of your favorite show. It really does feel like a season premiere. And to me, it is the season premiere. I mean, literally for me, I did our, top 50 frenzies, top 50 games of the 2024 college football season. I ended up going through 50 through 1 to close out the 2024 season. Now we move forward to the 2025 season, and now we're here at our spring outlooks. I said we were going to do our spring football outlooks, and we are here. Now it's going to be even more modified because it's just a college football show. So we're getting even more back, right? I went off to Mississippi for a little bit to see some friends and family. Came back, wasn't able to be here for Tuesdays, but now we return for Thursdays right here today in the year of our Lord, March 13th, 2025, on a beautiful Thursday afternoon the Lord has given us, and we are blessed to be here for 205 of Pigskin Frenzy, episode 205 of Pigskin Frenzy, doing our spring outlooks and kicking off our spring football coverage for the next month and a half or so, I guess, up until early May. Guys, welcome to Pigskin Frenzy on this beautiful Thursday afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I'm Joel Norris. And whether you're watching on YouTube, listening on Spotify, listening on Podbean, listening on Apple, a big thank you for taking some time out of your Thursday to just sit back, watch, and listen to some college football coverage presented by me. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, like each episode, leave comments down below. Spotify, Podbean, and Apple, all you got to do is just share around with others and follow on there as well. X and Instagram, at pigskin_frenzy. Follow, like the pages there. We have news and highlights from across college and college football. We have, and I really do comment on NFL, in the comments, but college football news and highlights. I give you my thoughts and personal info on that. We have a trivia question on Instagram stories, going to answer today's college football question, as well as all things of today for Pigskin Frenzy, and exclusive content that you're not going to want to miss on reels and clips of this show if you somehow miss the full episode of Pigskin Frenzy. We also have our website, www.pigskinfrenzy.weebly.com. Go there. You will find a store and affiliations page. More on that coming soon. We have a home and about me page. Learn more about me as your podcast host. There's a contact info down below. Name, email, and question. I'll answer it on air or off air if need be. There is also a platforms page. All the platforms I just mentioned on this show just a minute ago. Click and see which one's your favorite listening style of the show. All that and more on Pigskin Frenzy on www.pigskinfrenzy.weebly.com. Let me get a drink really quick. I apologize. I'm good. I am good. We are ready to rock and roll for Pigskin Frenzy. I'm excited. I am really excited to talk about spring football and to cover spring football and to talk about our spring outlooks for football, right? I mean, this is what we've been waiting for. We've been waiting to kick into gear of the 2025 season. And now that we're here, spring ball is upon us. It feels like it a little bit here in Central Illinois. And it felt like it down there in Mississippi. I'm going back to Mississippi soon, next month in April. So I will try my best to put out some good content, some good episodes, either A, before I leave, or C, while I'm down there. So, spring football. And let me go on and tell you something. It's a lot different from last year. If you are a fan of college football, you are going to want to tune into spring football games. I'm just going to sit there and say that. If you're a fan of a team, if you're a fan of college football, you're going to want to tune in to spring football games. I'm going to tell you why. Because it is important to know and gets you ahead of what you can expect from your team early on, heading into the fall and heading into the 2025 college football season. It really does. It shows you, okay, who needs to get better, who's already ahead of schedule, ahead of the season, and where are teams at heading into the season? What do they got to improve on? Because everybody's going to have to improve on something, right? So where do they need to do better? What is this team's offense going to look like? What are they going to look like on defense? Special teams, needs to get a little bit better. O-line, and you start just questioning everything and think, okay, they need to work on this before the season starts. They either A, do, or B, don't. And you love spring football because it's like honestly, as a fan, you're assessing your team and you're scouting your team and you're wondering, okay, I don't like that, but I also like this. I love spring football. A lot of people find spring football a little bit boring. Joel Norris does not find spring football boring, but here's where the kicker is on this and why it's so different this year, because teams are opting out opt-out of spring football games. You're going to sit there and think, okay, Joel, we knew this was coming. Yeah, I've been talking about it on X, and I've been talking about it on there. Go and follow me on X, at Pigskin_Frenzy. Please send me my blue check mark back. The only thing I do not like about X right now is when you change your profile picture on there, and I did that. You end up losing your X check mark, your blue verification mark, for the next few days. Not a big fan of that, but oh well. Hopefully, you give it back. So, and I'll get it back shortly. But, I mean, look, I said it on X before, and I've mentioned it on the show. I mean, I really haven't mentioned it on the show until now, but spring football and opting out of spring football games is sort of becoming the norm now. Texas has done it. They're opting more of we're going to talk about spring outlooks. So when I do spring outlooks, we're not just talking about spring games. We're going to talk about spring games for some, but we're also going to talk about spring practices also. So what I want to see from spring practices as well. So I'm ready to see what we can assess and what we can do, with the spring practices, right? And how we can grade their spring practices and how we can grade their spring games. A lot of them are going towards the OTA approach. And the OTA approach meaning, okay, we're going to do what the NFL does, have regular off-season, like spring-type workouts, and then, chill out for the summer, have a good summer, and then come back and get everybody ready and healthy for fall, spring, for training camp and preseason practices and getting ready for a schedule that plays up until close to late January if you're trying to make it that far, right? So I understand the assessment of, pulling out of spring games and then adjusting it for a lighter workload so you can save your players from injury and save their bodies and rest up their bodies, right? The student athletes' bodies. I understand that. As a traditionalist, I kind of don't like it because I love seeing the spring games. I think it's really, really good for guys like me who grew up in the BCS era and who are used to spring games and assessing your team through that. But also, it's good for the guys who are true freshmen who are early signees coming in and are playing in a spring game. It gives them a good, tough environment or a good feel for what a game could look like if you have a bunch of fans in there, and it's like a game environment for them, even though it's against your own team, right? So it's a scrimmage, but it's also a game to where you think, okay, this is what it's going to look like in the fall, but more in the fall, right? But you're just getting a little bit settled in with it. And I think that's what I like about the spring games. But nonetheless, I mean, teams are going to opt out. There's going to be teams that are playing their spring games. We're going to talk about 2 teams that are playing their spring games. And on this one, we have 2 teams that aren't playing their spring games. The teams that we're talking about and kicking off our spring outlooks on, and I wanted to do these teams for a minute, and I've already kind of foreshadowed and said in previous episodes that we're going to do these teams. It's Florida State, Purdue, Indiana, and Ole Miss. Those are what we're kicking it off with. And Florida State is what we're going to kick it off with. Florida State last year is a team that you can look at and you think, okay, scratch your head, right? What the heck happened, right? You're just thinking, what the heck happened? I mean, you start out in Dublin against Georgia Tech, and then, okay, they're opening favorites. You expect them to not only beat Georgia Tech, but probably beat them by a couple of scores. They ended up losing the game 24-21 with a game-winning field goal from Georgia Tech. What the heck happened? Week 0, not even week 1, week 0. And this is how they start their snub from the playoff redemption tour. That's not a good look. They ended up having the worst season I've ever seen Florida State have. They won two games, lost like 11 or 12, 2 games, and they only won 2, lost 11, 12. It was rough. It was probably the worst season I've ever seen Florida State have, especially in my lifetime. I'm used to seeing Florida State. If they lose games, it's like they go 8-4. They make a bowl game, but it's like a lower end bowl. But if they're really, really good, they are really, really good. This was the worst season I've ever seen them have. They didn't even they didn't even come far from reaching 500. All right, they weren't even above 500. They weren't even close to reaching 500. So it was rough. It was really rough to see. But we're going to talk about, honestly, and we're going to talk about Florida State heading into the 2025 season in the spring football that is happening. No spring football game. Just going to just point that out there. No spring football game. But it's not because It is not because of, excuse me, it's not because of, OTAs and getting a lighter workout. Maybe partially. But if you want to look at the real reason why, you can look it up on their X. You can look it up on their social media. You can look it up on their website, on their athletic website. No spring game. They're going to practice from March 19th to April 21st. Those are their spring practices. And then after that, they're done until fall. Here is why they're doing it. They are renovating Doak Campbell Stadium. So they announced it that they will get everybody in there in the first setting for Doak Campbell Stadium in Tallahassee. Will be Saturday, August 30th, when Alabama comes to town. So that's going to be their first game. And funny enough, Alabama is the team that they chose ahead of Florida State in the 2023 playoff. That is kind of ironic, don't you think? But that is what they're going to open up with coming up for the 2025 season in Doak Campbell Stadium. Home game for Florida State. But for Florida State, and if you want to look at what Florida State's, you know what they got. They cleaned house. Their staff is, at least the main coordinators are gone. We now have two pretty prolific coordinators, offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator. Head coach Mike Norvell went out and got some guys. Offensive coordinator Gus Malzahn. He's no longer a head coach at UCF. He left the UCF job and took the OC job at Florida State in the ACC. He is now controlling the offense, and we're going to see how the offense is a lot different. They could barely move the ball under DJ Uiagalelei in their offense last year. Now let's see what Gus Malzahn adds to the table. Then you got on DC, because their defense was pretty nightmarish as well. You get Tony White from Nebraska, and that is a really good hire as well. So you got some good guys as your coordinators. We're going to see how they do their first year. Is it going to be like it was, in 2023? Probably not. But I'm going to say this. There's only one way to go from up, right? There really is. With the coordinator additions and the players that you got from the portal, because they had a really, really good portal class, a top 10 portal class. You can only go one. There's only going to go one way from up, right? And like I said, there's going to be a better window to win more than 2 games, right? At least I hope, especially with the staff that you have. There's no spring game, like I said, March 19th through April 21st. Here is what I am looking forward to seeing. Brockland I don't think Brockland's going to start. I think they went out and got their man. They went out and got their man. If you've heard of him, he was under Bill O'Brien's system in Boston College. He's a guy that on Labor Day weekend in week 1 beat Florida State in Doak Campbell Stadium. His name is Thomas Castellanos. Castellanos from Boston College, transferring from Boston College to Florida State. He is most likely, I would think, going to be their starting quarterback, I would assume. I'm curious to see what Gus Malzahn does with him and what Mike Norvell does with him under Malzahn's offense and how he takes command of that offense. He's got a dual threat tendencies. He's fast, but he's also got some good, pretty much to me, a better arm than what Uiagalelei had last year. I'm curious to see what Castellanos did. So point number 1 for me of the spring outlook and what I'm expecting to see as we bring back the 1, 2, and 3 point approach for these outlooks for each team. What I'm looking forward to seeing for their spring outlook and for their spring practice is, can Castellanos find a rhythm and find some chemistry and see how he fares in Gus Malzahn's offense? That's number 1. I want to see how Castellanos does and how he fits into this Florida State offense, and can they reach a new thing? Number 2, because we talked about the coordinators just a minute ago, I want to talk about Tony White. I want to see what kind of foundation he's going to set for this defense heading into the 2025 season in spring. I'm looking forward to seeing how this defense is going to be in all phases, linebackers, defensive line, and secondary. I'm really curious to see how Tony White sets the foundation for this defense, because the defense was abysmal last year. It was not good. It was I wouldn't say it's on the levels of Miami. I think they were a little bit better than Miami, but still not good. You can see that from week 0 when Georgia Tech was moving the ball on them on the ground, at least. So their rushing defense, I'm curious to see how their rushing defense is going to look. I'm curious to see how they're going to look through the pass as well. Castellanos ate them up Florida State's defense up in the past last year when he was at Boston College. I'm curious to see how everything's going to get fixed on the defensive side of things because Florida State's defense a year ago looked night and day compared to what they did last year. And 2023 to 2024 looked night and day. I get that they lost a lot of guys, but I just think that for me, at least for me, I just feel that they could have done at least somewhat better last year. I'm curious to see on their defense, at least for me, who steps up on the defensive line. They got Deontay McCray. He's still there, redshirt junior. He could step up. They lost Patrick Payton to LSU in the transfer portal. Who's going to be that next, big-time edge rusher for them? I mean, you got Devontae Diggs, senior defensive line. He is still there. He can be a hybrid edge if you want. If you want him to be. Excuse me. You have. If you want to have a hybrid linebacker, you got Justin Cryer. He's a linebacker, but he can also move up to edge if he wanted to be. You got a lot of guys on this team that can do some damage. Can really do some damage. KJ Sampson, redshirt sophomore. You have Kevin Wynn, freshman. These are some new guys coming in for Florida State. You got some big-time guys who can make an early impact for this defensive line and this defense. I'm curious to see how Tony White uses some of these guys, and I'm curious to see how this defense is going to look overall. That's point number 2. Number 3, and this is kind of an interesting one, honestly. How can we get the running game fitting in with Thomas Castellanos? And I know Castellanos is, he can do it with his arm and his legs. You got some good receivers. You got some Deuce Robinson from USC transferring from the Trojans. He's going to Florida State. You got Squirrel White coming in from Tennessee. You got some good guys coming from the portal that can help out Thomas Castellanos. Now I'm going to tell you this. You got to balance it out with a running game. I'm looking at Roydell Williams, who can have a bounce back year. Jalen Lucas can have a bounce back year. You got some guys like that who can step up in the running game and who can balance everything out there. You got Cam, excuse me. In the running game, you have Jalen Lucas. Like I said, you have one big one. You got Cam Davis. Cam Davis is could be a solid addition as well. He could be a guy that you could use like a 3-headed dragon at the running game. Or a 4-headed dragon if you count, Castellanos running the ball. But a 3-headed dragon with 4-headed dragon with Castellanos in the run. You have Cam Davis. You have Roydell Williams. You have Jalen Lucas. All those guys can just rotate, and have a solid running game. I think Florida State's got the talent to be good, but they just need better coordinators. They all need to step up. Now let's see what Florida State does. I think it's only going to go up from here, and I really hope and I believe that in Mike Norvell. So that's the third point. So number 1, how is Thomas Castellanos going to fare in Gus Malzahn's offense? Number 2, I'm curious to see what the running game is going to look like. That's actually 3, but what the running game is going to look like. And I'm curious to see what Tony White does with some of those younger guys, but also builds how he sets a firm foundation with that defense for this Florida State team. That's what I'm looking for Florida State. They got some good weapons on offense as well. Some good tight ends like Landon Thomas, who is most likely going to start for this team. They got some good guys. I'm curious to see what Florida State's going to do in their spring practice, and we are going to do a spring results episode on Florida State, on Purdue, on Ole Miss, and Indiana when we start our spring results here and then within the next few weeks. We're going to have a few weeks worth of spring outlooks, and then we will do our spring results here in April. So that's our spring outlook on Florida State. Let's move on to another team. So 3 more teams before we conclude our episode of Pigskin Frenzy. This one is Purdue. You're going to think that's an interesting one. Purdue, they get rid of Ryan Walters after a couple of seasons of being the Boilermakers head coach. You're thinking, okay, well, it may be a good move. He's not really. His first stint wasn't good. They may give him a shot one day at being a head coach, but I'm going to say this right now, not the best look as starting off as a head coach. He's a good defensive coordinator, though, even though Their defense was one of the worst, and probably one of the worst in the country. The worst in the Big Ten. So who do they go get? They go get a defensive mind, and he goes by the name of Barry Odom, coming from UNLV from the Mountain West. He did really, really good at UNLV, so he goes from there to the Big Ten and goes to Purdue. Barry Odom is the new head coach for the Boilermakers. I said I was going to do an outlook on them, and I'm curious to see what it's going to do and what everything's going to go there. For Barry Odom, they have some guys, man, especially at quarterback. And we're going to talk about their quarterback situation in a minute. They got some guys at quarterback. They got some guys coming in through the portal as well and recruiting. So Barry Odom's sort of on a roll. Look, it's not going to happen within 1 year, but Barry Odom's sort of doing some stuff quietly that a lot of people are not going to expect heading into 2025. Barry Odom has as his OC, Josh Henson as Purdue's OC. That's a good move there. Henson's a solid, an underrated OC. Keep an eye on him. And then you got Mike Schreier from defensive coordinator Mike Schreier following him from UNLV because that was his DC at UNLV. So he brings his own guy in from UNLV, and UNLV had a pretty, not like fantastic defense, but they had a solid enough defense to where they were a little bit stingy. So you can leverage that and make the defense better. So you got some coordinators in there. You got some things in there. You got the spring game on April 12th. We're going to have the spring results on with Florida State, Ole Miss, and Indiana on that episode. But you have a spring game. It's April 12th, Saturday, April 12th. It should be a good one heading in to the 2025 season. Curious to see how that spring game goes. They are practicing right now as we speak. So here's what I'm looking forward to as their outlook and what I'm thinking from Purdue, because I said I was going to do one. So number one, and here's the number one outlook that I think, and number one point that I want to see from their offense, or from their team and their outlook for the spring. What's their defense going to look like? They ranked second to nationally in defensive EPA. So EPA, expected points allowed. And opposing QBR, which was 83.1. That is not good. Let me just put it, if you don't understand football term, I'm just going to tell you like this. We're just going to say it like this. It's not good, okay? It is not good. Not a good look for Purdue there. So they need a firm foundation on defense, and that's what we're talking about. Can they get a firm foundation on defense? And that is what we're looking forward to. Can Mike Schreier fix this defense? That's what we're talking about. Also, if you want to look at Purdue at number 2, and here's another one, I guess, for Purdue. That was number 1. How's the defense going to look, and how can you fix that defense? Because that defense was pretty rough. Number 2, this is going to be a wide-open quarterback battle. Who is going to be their starting quarterback, and who's going to take a leap in the starting quarterback in the competition, in the quarterback competition? You got 3 from the portal. 3. You got E.J. Colson coming from UCF, Malachi Singleton coming from Arkansas. You also got Evans Chuba coming in from Washington State. And I think those 3 right there, those 3 guys, if you look at what they've done, they haven't taken a lot of snaps. I mean, Malachi Singleton played a little bit in like the Tennessee game when he was at Arkansas. He hasn't taken a whole lot of snaps, but I'm going to sit there and say this. When he was in there, he showed off a lot of talent. He really did. He showed off a lot of talent. So we just got to see, right, who can take that leap in the starting quarterback spot. Those are the 3 quarterbacks for the job right now. It's a wide-open race. Who's going to take that next leap in the starting quarterback competition out of those 3 guys? Evans Chuba from Washington State, E.J. Colson from UCF, and Malachi Singleton coming in from Arkansas. Number 3 And last but not least, how is Barry Odom going to set a firm foundation heading into the 2025 year and try to set expectations and be realistic about everything in year one? I want to see what Barry Odom does. I want to see the culture change. I want to see how the environment's changed around West Lafayette, Indiana, and how everything has changed for Purdue under Barry Odom's leadership and under his coaching staff. I want to see what's changed for Purdue. I think that's a big thing that I want to see out of them heading in to the spring and heading in, for the 2025 season. So those are the 3 points that I got for Purdue. Number one, what's the defense going to look like? I'm curious to see, because that's my really number one priority for Purdue. Barry Odom's usually got some good defenses, so I really want to see what happens there. Number two, I want to see who's going to take that leap in the quarterback competition out of those 3 guys: Colson, Evans, Colson, Chuba, and Singleton. And then number 3, I would like to see how the foundation is going to look under Barry Odom as he is the new head coach of Purdue. That is Purdue's Spring Outlook. Their spring game is on April 12th. I'm curious to see what they're going to look like, and I really wanted to do the Spring Outlook for them because they're a very interesting case. So I'm curious to see what happens with Purdue. Number 3 on here now, I guess, or we got 2 more before we conclude our episode of Pigskin Frenzy, is their rival, Indiana. And I'm curious to see what happens with Indiana because Indiana's coming off of a really historically good season for their program. 2024 made the playoffs, got knocked out by Notre Dame first round, but they still made the playoffs. And Kirk Cignetti very confidently was ready to go take on everybody. First season, Google him, he wins. He said that, and he was very nonchalant about it, that he was going to come and take everything by storm in the Big Ten and he made the college football playoff doing it. So, what is year 2 going to look like under Kirk Cignetti, and what is it going to look like under everything? They moved their spring game actually to Friday. They did. They moved their spring game to Friday. And, to Thursday, to Thursday. And it is April 17th. Is their spring game. Is April 17th. They're going to have spring practices. They're going to have the spring game. April 17th is their spring game. You got head coach Kirk Cignetti. Their coordinators, you got Mike Shanahan coming in from Duke, their new OC. And then you got defensive coordinator Bryant Haynes still there in his second stint at Indiana. So, for the offensive coordinator, how's it going to look? And then this is for me, I guess. These are some good questions that I would like to ask. For me, and this is mainly offensive related, I can trust in their defense. I think their defense with Bryant Haynes was solid, and I think they can do a better job. And there's always room for improvement. But I think that for me, I think Bryant Haynes and his defense is going to be much improved this year. I'm not really worried about their defense as much. I'm curious about their offense and what's going to happen there heading into the spring and heading into the 2025 season and how it's going to look. There's no Curtis Rourke. So point number 1, you enter really, if you want to look, at their offense, you look at Fernando Mendoza, transfer quarterback from Cal. How is he going to fit in to Mike Shanahan's system and Kirk Cignetti's system at Indiana? It's a tougher conference than where you were at in the ACC with Cal. It's a tougher conference than the Pac-12. I'm curious to see what Fernando Mendoza does. It's a very interesting thing. I think it could probably work out, but I'm curious to see how he fits in and how he's going to adjust in this spring outlook and how he's going to adjust in spring. So I'm curious to see what he does. His brother, Alberto Mendoza, is the backup quarterback as well, so he is there behind him. So how is it going to look in Mike Shanahan, and how is it going to look in Kirk Cignetti's offense? That's point number 1 for me, and how is he going to fit in to that system, and how is it going to look, and how is he going to take on being the replacement for Curtis Rourke? That's number 1. Number 2, for me, I'm curious to see what the O-line is going to look like. The O-line they were a little bit limited, and I think that's why they lost a lot of their games. A lot of their games, as in 2 games. They lost to Ohio State and Notre Dame, the 2 teams that were in the national championship. Quite impressive for Indiana and first-year head coach Kirk Cignetti. Lost to the 2 teams that played in the national title game. but they were both limited in those games compared to their D lines on offensive line. So what do? They go to the portal, and they get 3 big-time names, big-time names in the O-line. Yeah, they have to replace all Big Ten center Mike Kactic, who has left Indiana. Drew Evans, his health, we got to monitor him and see what's going on with him in the spring. But you got Pat Coogan from Notre Dame, the team that beat you guys, right? From the team that beat you guys in the playoffs. You got Pat Coogan coming from Notre Dame to Indiana. That's a big bolster up for Kirk Cignetti. You got Zen Michalowski from Ohio State. You also got Khalil Benson from Colorado. You got three big-time guys and big-time playmakers on the O-line that could block for Fernando Mendoza and this rest of this offense in the spring and beyond. So I'm curious to see how the O-line's going to look and how they're going to practice well and how they're going to adjust heading in to the 2025 season and how it's going to be in the spring. So that's point number 2. What's the offensive line going to look like? And I'm curious to see, honestly, for me, especially, this is my third point, and this is the one I was kind of pondering on. What's the limit again for Indiana? And that is my thing. What's the expectations heading into spring for them? And I think it's a mental thing now. And it's a mental question. A lot of the other ones I started doing football related one, but this is a mental one and a mental grind heading into the spring season and 2025 season. What's their expectations heading into spring? Are they expecting to go to the playoffs? Or go to the Big Ten championship and then go to the playoffs? Or what is their expectations? I want to see what their expectation is, and I think it's going to translate to how they look at the spring practice and the spring games. If they're, hey, this team's for real, keep an eye on them. They got some weapons that we don't know about. I kind of want to see those weapons that we don't know about. I want to see some guys to step up, and those freshmen, those young players that can make an immediate impact that are new to the team. I want to see what happens and how their mindset is after losing the opening round of the playoffs, but I want to see how their mindset is heading in to the 2025 season and this spring. So that's my third point. The rest of the points are, number 1, what's Fernando Mendoza going to do and how is he going to adjust in this offense? Number 2, how are the offensive line? How's the offensive line going to look for Indiana? And then the mindset. How's their mindset going to be heading in, and what's their expectations? Do they have any goals set? What is their expectation heading in to 2025 and the spring of 2025 for this spring football season? And that's their whole outlook on everything. So that is our outlook for Indiana. Their spring game is April 17th. Reminder, April 17th is Indiana spring game. Go out, support the Hoosiers, and go and watch and stream and listen and watch the stream and watch it on which all the platforms that Indiana spring game is hosting their thing on. So that is Indiana's spring outlook. And here is our last spring outlook before we conclude today's episode of Pigskin Frenzy and before we go to Tuesday's episode and enjoy everybody's weekend, right? So here's our last spring outlook, and it's Ole Miss. First team of the SEC that we're going to look at is Ole Miss. And I'm curious to see what about Ole Miss. They're losing 15 players. I said last year that they're bringing they brought all their guys back last year. All their guys back last year. I'm curious to see how they are going to look now this year, now that they're losing 15 guys to the NFL. Do they load up in the portal? Yes, they're in the top 3, as always, as transfer portal class, right? They're loading up. Lane Kiffin's the portal king. He knows what to do. He's adding up. And you look at everything, and you're like, oh, man, it's not going to be like it was last year. It may not, but it could. Who knows? Is Ole Miss going to be a true threat heading into the 2025 year? Are they going to be underlooked like they were, in 2023 or 2022 and just kind of an afterthought, and no one's going to really look into them? What's going to happen there? I'm curious to see what's going to happen and go down there. They're losing, like I said, they're losing 15 guys to the NFL. They replaced Jackson Dart. Hello, Austin Simmons. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but they're replacing a lot of guys on this team. What are they going to do, and how are they going to replace these guys, and what is their expectations headed into the 2024 season? I said last year that all the hype, every time Ole Miss gets hyped, they end up doing worse than expected. This team was good enough last year, talent-wise, to make the college football playoff. They lost to Kentucky, LSU, and Florida, and that halted them from going to the college football playoff. And I said to myself that they're going to do worse than expected if they always get hyped. Now, granted, they won 10 games. They won 10-plus games, so they had a good year, 10-3. That's not bad. They went to the Gator Bowl. They blew out Duke and won in the Gator Bowl. It wasn't what they wanted, but they still won 10 games. But this team could have been a lot better, and it was really of what could have been season for Ole Miss because they had the talent to probably go to the playoffs, but not only go to the playoffs, but make a deep run in the playoffs. This team could probably this team last year could have lined up with a lot of people in that field. Maybe not Ohio State, maybe, but they could have lined up against a lot of others in that college ball playoff field. I think that they could have lined up against Indiana. They could have lined up against SMU. They could have lined up against Clemson. They could have lined up against Tennessee even. They probably could have lined up against Texas even, maybe. And I'm going off on that, but they could have, maybe. Probably even Oregon. They could have done that against Oregon, could have. They had a lot of talent. They miss it and miss the mark. So it was a what could have been season for them. So coming off of that, what is 2025 going to look like for them now that they're losing those guys? What's it going to look like? Are they an afterthought? What's going to happen? For Ole Miss, there's no spring game this year. This is the second straight year they're not doing a spring game. They are doing Meet the Rebels, a Meet the Rebel showcase, and everyone's going to meet the Rebels and meet the new players for 2025 for this season. They're doing that coming up in April. They have no spring game, but they have spring practices, and those begin coming up next week, March 18th through April 19th. April 19th is their last spring practice, and they're done until fall, but no spring game. They're replacing it with Meet the Rebels instead to get their bodies rested and well prepared. Head coach Lane Kiffin, offensive coordinator Charlie Weiss, and defensive coordinator Pete Golding are all back. Charlie Weiss Jr., Pete Golding, both back for another run at Ole Miss. Number one, and this is the number one point I'm going to make about Ole Miss. How is Austin Simmons going to do as the replacement for Jackson Dart? That's the biggest question that everyone's going to ask. What is going to happen there? How is he going to replace probably one of the winningest quarterbacks in Ole Miss history in Jackson Dart? I've been hearing a lot of good things and a lot of good praise about Austin Simmons and how he handles himself, he can be a good leader on and off the field. His throwing ability is second to none. He's out there, he's grinding, he's working, he's preparing well, he's learning the playbook well, and he's ready to take up that mantle to be the starter. But I want to see how he can do it in these spring practices and how he can line up as QB1 against the number one defense, number one starters on defense, right? So I'm curious to see in this outlook how Austin Simmons handles himself as QB1 and replacing Jackson Dart. Number two for me, I'm curious to see the running game for Ole Miss. What's going to happen there? Ulysses Bentley, unfortunately, no longer with Ole Miss. You don't have Henry Parrish either. So who steps up at the running back? You got Logan Diggs coming off that huge knee injury, but he's back. You got him coming off. Maybe Logan Diggs can be a full-on workhorse this season behind Austin Simmons and carry a lot of the load in the running game. What's the running game going to look like for Ole Miss? I'm very curious to see how they can do in that department this year. And then number three, how are you going to replace some of the weapons that you had at wide receiver, but I'm also going to flip-flop it on the defensive side of the ball as well. So defensive side of things, you had Walter Nolan, you had Princely Umanalayan, you had Trey Amos, Jared Ivey, Chris Paul Jr., JJ Pegasus, you had Kari Coleman. You had a lot of guys there. But for wide receiver, you had Jordan Watkins, Ulysses Bentley, you had Caden Prescorn, Juice Wells, Trey Harris. You had obviously Jackson Dart. Defensive side, you have Walter Nolan. I mean, you had a lot of guys. How are you going to replace some of those guys? And who are you looking on to take up that mantle to replace those guys, right? Here are some names that you can throw out for to replace, right? To replace some of those guys. If you want to look at the linebacker spot, you got Raymond Collins coming in from JUCO, coming from Jones College. He could be that one of those guys that takes up that mantle, the linebacker spot. You have TJ Banks coming in as a sophomore, coming in, and he could replace Trey Amos, right? You got some younger guys who make a difference, who could be a difference maker on this team for Pete Golding. You also have at the receiving spot, Caden Lee is still around. You got guys like Devin Price who can come in and take up that mantle from FAU. You got guys at the defensive end spot, I mentioned Princely. You have Prince Will, his brother. You got him to replace Princely at the defensive end and take up that mantle as well. You still got also in the portal at defensive end, Deshaun Womack from LSU, transfer portal there. You got him at safety. You got Sage Ryan from LSU from the portal. You got a lot of guys who can take up that mantle and replace some of those stars there on both sides of the ball from the defensive side of things, but on the offensive side of things, you got a lot of guys who could take up that mantle as well. So the younger guys could step up and make an immediate impact for this Ole Miss team. So I'm curious to see what the Ole Miss guys do, the younger guys do, to take up that mantle and replace some of those star and key players that are leaving. So that is point number 3 and the last point. So the points that I make for the spring outlook and what I want to see from Ole Miss is, number 1, how is Austin Simmons going to handle himself as quarterback number 1 to replace Jackson Dart at Ole Miss? Number 2, I want to see what the running game is going to look like. And number 3, I want to see if some of those younger players and some of those transfer portal additions can take up the mantle and replace some of those key players like a Walter Nolan, like a Chris Paul Jr., like a Ulysses Bentley, Trey Harris, Jordan Watkins, Caden Prescore, and others on that team. That is Ole Miss's spring outlook for us. No spring outlook, and no spring game rather for them. It's a Meet the Rebels showcase. They have March 18th. March 18th through April 19th is their spring practices, and then we will see and give our spring results within the next few weeks on Ole Miss. That was the spring outlook for Florida State, Purdue, Indiana, and Ole Miss. We will have spring outlooks throughout the rest of the next few weeks, continuing our series on that, and then we'll go do spring results, continuing our spring football coverage throughout the next month and a half, heading into probably early May, heading in there for Pigskin Frenzy. Guys, that just about does it for Pigskin Frenzy. Guys, a big thank you for taking some time out of your Thursday to just sit back, watch, and listen to some college football coverage, some spring football coverage presented by me. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, like each episode, leave comments down below. Spotify, Podbean, and Apple, all you got to do is just share around with others and follow on there as well. X and Instagram at Pigskin_Frenzy. Follow up the pages there. You're going to get episode updates, news and highlights from across college and NFL football. You're going to get trivia questions on Instagram stories. Go and answer today's college football question as well as all ends of the date for Pigskin Frenzy. Just a straight college football show. You're going to get our own thoughts and exclusive content of all things college football here with Pigskin Frenzy. Guys, the website's www.pigskinfrenzy.weebly.com. Make sure to check that out and keep plugging in to Pigskin Frenzy on all platforms. Guys, big thank you for taking some time out of your Thursday to just sit back, listen, and watch some coverage for some spring football and some college football coverage presented by me. We will be back Tuesday with our latest edition of Pigskin Frenzy episode. This is 205, episode 206 on Tuesday. Continuing our spring outlooks, we are going to talk about Alabama, South Carolina, Clemson, and LSU. Those are our next schools up for the spring outlooks. Alabama, South Carolina, Clemson, and LSU should be an action-filled spring outlook series for the next 4 schools on Tuesday. And until Tuesday, guys, I'm Joel Norris signing off. Have a great weekend. We will see you then. We'll see you Tuesday, and we'll see you then, guys. We couldn't do this show without the Lord. We're thankful that we're back here safe in the war room doing Pigskin Frenzy. And without you guys and without the Lord Jesus, we would not be here. And if you want to come to know Jesus and talk to me about knowing Christ, Lord, who is our Lord and Savior, guys, contact me. All platforms, you know me, X, Instagram, and the website. You can contact me and come to know Jesus, and we can talk to you guys about, just talking to you about the Lord Jesus. He is so good. We wouldn't be here without him, and we wouldn't be doing and having the platform that we have without him. So we glorify him and give him all the praise for Pigskin Frenzy. Guys, we love you all. We're praying for you all. As always, stay the course.